Welcome to episode 2 of the Learning Differently, Thriving Wildly podcast. This one to me is a special one. I asked my guests to be vulnerable, so I'm going to be vulnerable today. I think it's only fair. But I'm about to introduce to y'all someone very special to me, both personally and academically. She was my elementary school resource room teacher for a year at least. But if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here. But we're going to learn all about that as this podcast gets started. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Miss Deitrich to the podcast.
Hello, everybody. How are you? JP, you made me tear up.
Well, see, I know, and I know like these episodes, and that's the point of this, right? It's kind of to, like I said, to be vulnerable, but at the same time, like vulnerability comes at a cost, right?
Yeah.
And it comes and it puts a lot people through a lot. But I think the listeners out there, they need to hear these heartfelt, true stories because their journey just may be starting. And I think that was my whole point for these podcasts, is to kind of get these stories out and to encourage others that no matter what your WIS scores may look like, at the end of the day, anything is possible with guidance, with support from others, but just the belief that you could do it is always important.
Yep. We're all human and we all have emotions attached to everything we
Yeah.
do.
That's it. And as you know, as Miss Dietrich, I'm sure it can tell you, I come from a very Italian family, so my emotions run wild very often. And I guess as Jersey people, which we both are, emotions certainly run high. But when I asked Miss Dietrich to come on here, I thought this episode was going to be kind of just about me. However, I learned something about her for the first time, and I've known her now for over 34 years, almost 35 years. She is also dyslexic or has a learning disability. So do you want to just talk about that real quick? Because I was shocked to hear that.
Sure. So I went to school with my mother, and my mother taught there. And so I was one of those kids later learning that my name always came up. Like, was I a BSI kids, basic skills? Was I need to be tested? And I always compensated for it. So they never put me through testing. But what happened to me was, as I went further along, I struggled. Like, I would be that kid who studied for hours and get like a low C or a D. And it
Right.
just got to the point where it damaged my self-esteem so much that it affected everything I did. So when I was, I think a sophomore in college, I actually said to my mother, I want to get tested. I want to just know, because at least if I know that there's a disability, it's not me. I'm not stupid. I can't do this. So I finally got myself tested. I mean, that time they didn't really diagnose me. I think I'd be diagnosed with specific learning disability at this time. But what they found was like my memory wasn't great. I didn't have this. Sometimes I did reversals. But for me, it was a relief in a way, because I just thought I was stupid. I could not figure
Right.
out what was wrong with me. And I struggled and I worked so hard. And because I compensated, I was always a pleaser, right? Like, everybody has their out. Like, I know, JP, you were a great athlete, right? So that was kind of your
Right.
niche. Mine was pleasing, right? So I couldn't excel in the classroom. I struggled with it. I thought it was me. So like, I went overboard trying to please everybody, trying to do, because I felt so insecure about myself, I would do anything to make myself feel better. If that
Right.
makes sense.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So see that's amazing. Is that because of your struggles? Is that why you kind of went into the route that you did in the field that you did in terms of the special ed route? Or is that just because your mother was a teacher, you kind of knew and felt like that was my path?
I think a little bit of both. I think my mother was a teacher, but I think because I struggled so much, I know that if I was struggling, other children were struggling. Like, when I was a senior in high school, I used to volunteer like on my study halls, like in like the we would like the self-contained classes, and I loved it, and I could see myself in some of these children, right? Like, I could see myself, they
Mhm.
were struggling. And I felt at home there. I felt at home knowing that other people are like me, and I could
Right.
actually give to other people and other teachers. And so I went in that field. My major was really psychology, but I went back for regular. I was a regular ed. I've never taught regular ed in my 32 years teaching.
Right.
And then I went back and got my special ed, because that's really ultimately where my niche was, like helping people, finding ways, strategies. There's always a way to tap into a
Right.
curriculum, no matter what anyone says, always a way. And that's what I've learned in my career, that you can always find a way to modify the curriculum, make it accessible, a playing field for everybody. So yes,
Yeah.
I think it had a strong um way for my path to my career. And as I went on in my career, autism became a big thing. So then I went back for my BCBA. Like I sat for everything. Every time I came up in a challenge in my career, I wanted to learn. I wanted to make a difference. So I would go back to school and learn about it and put it into works and things like that. And ironically, when I got to the point for my BCBA and I was like, I have to take another test, right? Because when you're learning disabled, tests are like, oh my gosh, you can't do this.
Yeah.
Like, it take me forever to get into grad school, take me forever to pass the teaching test. So I got to the point, I had kids at that point, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to sit for it. Not that I didn't think I could do it. It was it wasn't going to change my path. I had made my mark on this world of teaching. And so I wasn't putting myself through the stress, but I learned enough to help me along in my career.
Right. They felt no real need to take the test because at that point you learned everything you needed to learn, and taking the test would not change anything in your
Not
career.
prove that. And I wasn't going to switch to be a BCBA. Like I had already had my years. I wasn't going to switch, but I learned so much about it. I have the certificate. I just never took the exam. So
gotcha. Yeah, and for all the listeners, so yes, she was my academic teacher, but I also went through student teaching, and trained with Miss Deitrich, and I learned so much from you in terms of how to change your lesson and make it individualized for all learners all at once. And I think that is the biggest skill that you taught me throughout that whole journey. And there was plenty of them, but I think it was the ability to create a lesson plan where you're hitting all the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile learners all at once. And I think in the field that we both work at, and for dyslexic learners in general, that is so important, because when you're in a classroom full of, let's just say fourth graders, but you have learners on all different levels, it's so important to tap into, how they learn, and to reach them on their level. And I thank you so much for that. I even used my first year of teaching. I used a bunch of your lessons that that you had created, that you asked me to implement in your class, and it worked like a charm. So
and you know what? And it's hard for when you have a disability, because we're very structured, right? We live on structure, like everything's. But you're up there, and you can see the kids that are watching you; they're not getting it. Like it's like okay, like this looked great in my head, and I put it on paper, but now I'm up here, and they're not getting it. So now you have to automatically switch on a dime to try to get them, and that's hard for. I mean, I think you're like me; you're very structured. So that was a learning curve I had to do. Like, oh, okay, so you got to get out of your comfort zone again. How are we going to do this to reach that one kid or those two kids that are looking you like a deer in a headlight? Because clearly it's not working.
Yep. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I call myself crazy when I say this, but of course we always look forward to, when we have our Christmas break or summer break. But then like a couple of days into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like everything's thrown off. My ADHD goes through the roof, and then, I don't know what to do with myself half the time. And that deals with the whole structure point of things.
Yes,
it's like,
does.
I like to be very structured, but being a teacher, you have to be flexible. And I think having and learning with a disability helped me become more flexible in my teaching, because if I would get it and one of my students didn't get it the way that I got it, I always knew that, okay, let's try it this way, let's try it that way, because of all the things that I've learned as a learner with dyslexia, is there's always another way to teach something. I think that's so important.
There's always a way to scaffold it. Like you start up here, right? But there's always a way to scaffold it and bring it in, present it another way that they can understand it, always. And sometimes it's just going more. I want to use the word simple, but you're not simplifying your expectations. You're just simplifying the task to get them to that endpoint that you need them to be at.
Absolutely. And so before I take these podcasts, I always take little notes. And one of my notes is just to, thank you, but Leonia shout out to Leonia school system. But it was the accountability, that like you just had mentioned, that you're not changing the expectations, right? You're just changing the way that you're teaching. And I think that's so important for parents and for educators and for family members to understand, is that you never want to change your expectations or the accountability of your child or your student. Because once you change that accountability, they end up kind of relying too heavily upon, the scaffolding or the tools that you're teaching them, and they don't ever learn to take accountability. So I always applaud Leonie, and I can go on, like Miss Adelstein as my classroom teacher. She always kept me accountable. And, at the time I always hated going to her class because she always ran me through the mill. And it was always like, you're going to read this, whether you want to read this or not. But it was because she loved me as a person and she knew that I had it in me and she held me accountable. And I think Leonie in general was awesome with that throughout my kindergarten through middle school years. So I think parents out there that, you have a child that comes home and doesn't want to do the homework and is kicking and screaming and trying to get out of it. I think just holding them accountable, listening to them, working with them, but making sure that that task gets finished is extremely important.
It might just be doing it in smaller, snippets instead of sitting down for an hour doing your homework. Maybe it's you do 10 minutes at a time. I did that with my kids with their college essays. We were fighting, so I'm like, all right, we're going to set the time. We're going to work on it for 10 minutes. Like, it's just finding that way that works for everybody.
Right. And so on my last podcast with Josh Clark, we talked a little bit about like our experiences in the classroom and things that we would do to kind of get out of having to read aloud or having a spell on the board. And I bring this up because there's always one time that always sticks out to me in my head. And it was, I think I was fifth grade at this point, and I had to write on the board. And I knew I couldn't spell what I was asked to write. And I went up to the board and I was terrified. I tried to get out of it by saying my stomach hurt or something like that. But again, the accountability kicked in. The teacher and my aide at the time was like, go ahead, just go up there and do it. And, as a dyslexic learner and knowing that you were going to fail, because I was going to fail at that moment. I wasn't going to spell the word right. Or the sentence was going to be spelled right. I always expected the worst. So I went up there and I'll never forget this. And I started writing and I heard laughing behind me. And I was like, geez, are they laughing at me? What are they? And I kept writing, and the laughing kept getting louder and louder. And I turned around, I'll never forget this, and I said something I wasn't supposed to say, and I got in trouble. But looking back at that moment, I realized that those two kids that were laughing were like my best friends, and they were always laughing with each other. So they probably weren't laughing at me. But it's just that ability to, to accept that if something's going to be wrong and they're not laughing at you, they were just laughing. And that always sticks in my mind. I always tell that story to my students because it's extremely important to look back on things like that and say, put it in the past. It was nothing. Don't let it harp on you. But was there any moments like that in your life, in your learning, that happened to you?
I was that kid. So I was, like I said, I didn't want to get in trouble. So I would, when they did the read out loud, I would like count the sentences ahead so to know when I was going to read, because I am also a terrible speller. But I also until I actually learned Orton, I couldn't really decode that well because I didn't, we didn't learn that. So yeah, I remember one time we were having a spelling bee when I was younger. Spelling bees were big, and I got the word beautiful and couldn't do it, and I knew I couldn't do it, and I was like mortified. And you know what, like I of course didn't spell it correctly. I had to sit down, but it was like, now I owe it. Now I'm perfectly, I know that's like the one word I always know how to spell because right. Like it traumatized me in the fact that no one really cared. Like I wasn't going to win that spelling bee no matter what. It didn't matter. But to me, that has stuck with me because because I don't like being the center of attention either. So when I'm, you're standing up in the spelling bee, everyone's looking at you, I'm already panicking because I don't know how to spell it. And like you said, I knew I was going to fail. And I was so nervous. I didn't even have how to attack it at all. So now I don't like it still affects me because I still don't like to be the center of attention and the spelling part. So yeah, like I said, it stuck with me forever. I know how to spell it now. But it was just that time that I'll never forget.
But isn't that funny? You say you don't like to be the center of attention, but here we are as teachers, and every day we're the center of attention.
I know. But it's so different than being in front. Like I have to present the faculty meeting tomorrow, and I'm like a nervous wreck over it. Like, like it's just, and I could probably talk about my profession and what I do like the back of my hand, but to get up and do it, again, it comes to that insecurity. I still have insecurities about it.
Right. And I don't think you have to worry about anything. Everyone looks up to you over there. I think you're going to be fine. But to go back to, the diagnoses and the testing, and I know you said you were tested in college. So this is a real message to parents and to family members that have their kids tested for the first time. Know that whether they express it or not, it's monumental for them. And I say that because I remember, and I started writing a book a little bit about all this, but it's more or less, just my thoughts on paper. But it sticks out to me like I remember it vividly. So I had a little league baseball game that night, and my mom's like, "We got to go to the doctor's real fast. You know, he's going to ask you a bunch of questions." And I was like, "What do you mean questions?" She's like, "You're going to get tested a little bit." I said, "A test?" And right then and there, I knew I didn't want to go. As soon as
Of
she said I'm getting
course.
tested, like that was the end of it. But then I also was worried about getting to my baseball game. But we piled into the car and we drove. I think it was down the shore, so that was about 2 hours from where I grew up to take the test. And I remember everything from the smell of the doctor's office to, it was all wooden panels. I'll never forget. Everything was wood. The early '90s, everything was wooden paneled. The seats were wood. But I remember sitting in the office waiting to be called back, and it was just a magazine, and then next to the magazine was like a bucket of more magazines. And I wasn't used to that as a kid because I was in second grade or so at that time, and I expected the doctor's office to have, pinball or Pac-Man or something like that. But I knew that this was different. And I remember my anxiety starting to rise up. And then when he called me back to go test with him, I remember walking in. And it was like a big conference room type of setting, and this huge wooden table. And then at the end of one wooden table was a file, a vanilla file. And then on the other end was a camera. I was like, oh gosh, what is going on here? And he put me through the ringer. But I vividly remember the sound of the clock, and I'll never forget this. It was like tick, 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 because I hated being there. I despised being there because I knew what he was doing. I didn't know exactly what he was testing for, but I knew whatever we were doing, I wasn't going to be good at.
Right.
And it was just an absolute 2 hours of misery for me. So I want to tell parents and educators and those that do the testing is really approach this in a kind manner, and understand that this moment for that child, I don't care how old they are, is going to stick with them forever. And I know you got tested as when you got older, and that was more of a choice for you. And so our situations are totally different in that aspect of things. But I think the testing is big, and for the parents out there, it is extremely important that you get them tested as early as possible.
Agree. And
So
I think
we
it's also your, sorry to interrupt you, but I
no,
think it's
please, yeah,
also as a parent, I know it's probably a shock, and it's
right,
in the fact that as a parent, you love your children so much, you don't want anything to be wrong with them mentally, physically, healthily, like school wise. So it's a shock. But the way you approach that and how you don't look at it as like it's a bad thing, right? Like I don't like that's the big thing. Like you should approach it with I'm gonna back you up, I'm gonna support you, I'm gonna do whatever
yeah,
I can, rather than be like a a terrible diagnosis, because it's not that at all. So
mhm,
the way you approach it with your kids is how
yep.
your kids is going to approach the rest of their life with their schooling, and that is huge because I've seen it both ends, and I've seen how it affects the children. So
Yeah, and I guess educating yourself on it as a parent before you kind of approach it to your child, I think would be extremely important too. Because, like you said, the support is huge, and I mentioned this in my last podcast with Josh. Is my parents had no idea what that was. What is a learning disability? What does that mean? Where is he going to be when he gets older? Is he ever going to be able to learn? And I also mentioned this quickly too. Is that my father thought there was nothing wrong with me. You know, I said that he was like he remembers the football plays. Why can't he remember
right.
the dates in history class or and things like that? And my mom, on the other hand, was a total opposite approach with me. It was more or less, let's just figure this out. I'll draw you pictures on the note cards if I have to. We'll play games when you get home for homework. I'll deal with your tantruming on the floor when you have homework, and we'll push through it, and we'll do the homework little by little, like you mentioned. But I think just understanding that it's not a death sentence is extremely important. And I think that's another reason why this podcast is. I want this to reach as many ears as possible, is because a lot of times many parents don't understand it. They
No.
don't understand what is dyslexia. I mean, I had no idea what dyslexia was when I was diagnosed with it, and it took me years. And I'm still, we don't know everything about it, and we're still learning about it. And I think it's extremely important. You're absolutely right to have that support system, and to be the advocate for your young child before they can advocate for themselves.
Right. And have listen, as a parent, you're gonna have the emotions. I get it, but like how you approach it with them, and depending on their age, right? Like if their age, you can have it sit like, yes, I understand it's going to be a struggle, it's going to, you're going to work hard, but like, it's just how you deal with it. If you're having an emotion, but deal with it away,
Right.
take your time to deal with it, and then approach it the way you think you need to with your child, because like I said, when you have children, as if you have children, you never want anything. You want their lives to be easy, like perfect, but in a perfect, there's
Right.
no such thing, right? There is no such thing. So
Right.
I think you have to just realize that you're allowed to feel the way you're feeling. It's just don't always portray negativity with that diagnosis.
Absolutely. Because like my story is as a young child, these small little blippets of what could be your life with your child are actually huge momentum life changes for that person, that individual, that child,
Yes.
that they remember. Um, do you? So you mentioned Orton, obviously Orton Gillingham, which we are a school and we do teach it here, both in the classroom and in an individual setting on a daily basis. When did you start using that program? What was it like? Was it in the 90s? Was it did I use it? Did you use it with
Did
me?
use it. So
Right,
I received training probably early on. Once I went to resource room teacher, I got training. And I did like I'm not an Orton scholar, but I went to like
right,
I did like a week long program of it. And this is what I've learned. I love Orton, but what I've also learned, I use simple reading. I've used a variety of different tools.
right,
And what I've learned is that the best practicing teachers use all the methods I have, depending on who's in front of them. Right.
right,
So like every child, most thrive on Orton, but some might need a more visual or simple. I don't know if you have ever
right,
heard of simple reading. It's a very
right,
visual. I used that for a while. And so I think just using everything you possibly can to get your hands on that's good practicing is knowing. That's why like reading a book, like, since COVID, a lot of times things have been a little different. And like I think some teachers get used to like having a script in front of you. There is like I'm a special
no
ed teacher. I'm
script.
like script. I'm like, I don't even know what that is because everything I've ever
Right,
taught, I've had to like reinvent the wheel, like in some way or another. So I think just knowing what has worked and knowing the child that's in front of you,
right.
how you going to reach them, right? Whether it's this program, that program, or just digging into something that you did years ago, or that's what makes the best teachers because you really have to know what's in front of you um, in order to reach them. Does that make sense? Like that answer?
Yeah,
Because I think,
absolutely. And I think what we do well here is that we have the designated OG time, right? So
yes.
once a day, they go for 45 minutes to an intensive OG, either one to one, two on one, so on and so forth. But in the classroom, that's where things get what you're
Yeah.
saying is let's do all different types of programs. Let's introduce new things to them. With staying obviously with the basis of OG in the classroom, which is the multisensory approach aspect of things. But it's kind of like that, one shoe doesn't fit all. But as long as you're getting the foundation in OG, I think that's the most important thing. And then
Right.
when they come to the classroom for social studies and science and things like
Right.
that, that's when you can kind of experiment. And
I
that's when
agree. And
you
OG,
give
I mean,
individual.
it's direct instruction, right? So, like the kids who receive OG, they need that direct instruction. And so, like,
Right,
you're different. You're in a private school, like in a public school, we do the same thing. We do have some OG time slots and things like that. But unfortunately, we can't run an OG the way
right.
OG is meant to be ran, to run like it. But exactly what you say, those ones that need that direct instruction, that rote repetition, that's what you're
Absolutely.
getting at. Because once they have those foundations, then you're just flying with it, right? Because they already have those skills.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important to know that individual child, right? I mean, it's that what we do. That's what we have to do
That's what we do.
as a special ed teacher. Can you positively say that your LD shaped who you are now, both personally and academically?
150%. There is no it's everything I was. And you know what? It made me, looking back, like I said, I still struggle with self-esteem issues, but it made me stronger in the fact that I knew if I put my mind to, like, if I worked hard, I was gonna come out. And it made, I wanted to help people. I'm a person that loves to help people, and it just shaped who I was because I was that kid. I was that kid who struggled and didn't really tell anybody. Um, when I got into teaching, I loved seeing that light bulb go off in a kid with that smile that was like, oh, I got this. Like I understand this. I'm not gonna be like in the corner with the dunce cap on. It's like that's what
Right.
you always, so it 100% shaped me. And as I said earlier, when I did come to something that I tried, I didn't understand, or I couldn't, it pushed me to go back and learn more. Even in a setting where I knew I would struggle writing those papers,
Right.
learning. Like I knew it was not going to be an easy road, but I did it anyway because all I wanted to do is reach more children so they could thrive. So I could never see myself doing anything different.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a common theme because that's a question I'm going to ask everybody is, has the LD shaped you? And for me, it's shaped everything about me. I mean, it's shaped the way I think about things. It shaped the way how I react to things. It made me emotional. It made me passionate. It made me want to prove people wrong, which is what I mentioned in the last podcast with Josh. And without it, I don't know who I would be because it's everything to me. It's who I am. And I think if we could teach our children to accept that and know that their failures actually turn into life lessons, I think we can make larger strides academically and socially and emotionally quicker. So that's why here at my school, since we all of our children are LD students, I love it because it's such a nurturing, um, you know, own it, wear it like a badge of honor.
Yes.
I told Josh too, is I have actually, I think your signature's on one of these IEP meetings I have on my wall, but I have the my WIS scores up here. I have one of the IEP meeting notes up here. And, I love looking back at those and just reading like, wow, I was at a 7% for dictation. That's
It
pretty
empowers
low.
you. It empowers you
Yeah.
to like that's
Yeah.
what it's empowering to look back um and to know where you've come. Like it just is, it's so empowering. And also to know that you somewhere, like I look at this right here, like this is empowering to me. Like
Yeah.
you were in my classroom. Look at you. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like look
Yeah.
at like, you know what? You've done so much. Like that's so empowering to me as someone who did play a role in your life. Like this is what it's all
Absolutely.
about right here.
Absolutely. And just to go on that, go ahead and talk about me a little bit. What kind of student was I? And be as honest as you possibly can, because I may have a different view of what I was like when I was a younger kid. But I just think it's also important that, I'm sure some of my students are going to be listening to this, and I want them to know that I was not perfect because that's far from the truth.
So I would have you in research room. I think you'd come out for like reading, writing, and math.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'd see you maybe 3 times a day, or I can't remember what your IEP was at the time, but you'd come to my room and you were that kid who I would say you were like, I don't want to say class clown, but you would like to make people laugh. So in the fact that to deflect off your work, right, you
Yeah.
would try to be
Yeah.
like make smart alecky comments, but not disrespectful. Anyway, you were never a disrespectful kid. But like you said, I think because you knew school was so hard, you tried to deflect by being funny, right? So like I think that was it, that's really what I remember. I remember you always worked hard. I remember you working closely with your mom. I remember us
Yeah.
study skills. We would study for tests. Like we would come up with mnemonic
Yeah.
devices and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's what I remember is that you just wanted to make people laugh. And you were a great athlete. So you were kind of like that macho jockey kind of like, I'm good at like you had that
Right.
going
Right.
for
Right.
you, right? So like
Right.
so that kind of fit into you making people laugh with your personality. That's how you deflected off your schoolwork.
Yeah, and see, that's a great example of kind of how my LD shaped me. I'm throughout my life in college, I was always that clown or that always
Yep.
jokester, and I used it like you're absolutely right. I use it as a way to get out of things.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you said
you
the
know, I
stomach ache, right? So you escaped either by stomach ache or by making people
or
laugh.
being
That's how you
yeah,
escaped your work.
right. So students out there, if you're listening, nothing has changed. Uh, nothing has changed. But yeah, so going back and thinking about all that it means a lot to me because it validates how I remember escaping or I guess being okay with showing up to school is a better way for me to say it. I did not like school. I guess a lot of LD students just don't like school because, like you said, I was an athlete and that's what I was good at, and I felt like that's where I was most comfortable, and where I was most uncomfortable was in the classroom setting. So
It's the
yeah,
unknown, right? Like, I often use the example of like, if you have to write an essay, right, and you're looking at that blank paper, or if you're an artist in that blank canvas, it's blank, right? It's like, that's just it. Going into school when you're a kid with learning disability, it's like what, 6 hours of I'm not good at this. I'm not good at all. And I have this blank thing. I don't know what's coming because there's no structure to it because you're a kid. You don't really know what's so it's like just looking at that blank canvas and never being able to get anything down on it. And that's like a really lonely, scary feeling.
yeah, it is, and Josh and I talked about that last episode. It's it's the acceptance of I'm going to fail and I just got to do it and we got to keep working.
Yep.
And I think that he was talking about how that light bulb slowly comes on, and then when that light bulb flicks on, it's not until they're a little bit older, but it's just continuing to monitor and help and push and give the most advice and encouragement you can for those students, because eventually that light bulb is going to come on and they're going to accept it. And I think you can never thrive with an LD until you accept it.
I
And once
agree.
you accept it, things become easier. Like you, you're a great example for that, right? You were dying to know why. Why am I not getting this? Why is this so hard? And then you figured it out later on in life in college. So that's a great comparison.
And I think it's also you just I actually just lost my train. See
That's an ADHD. I totally get it.
remember what I was going to say, but I just do think it empowers you, and I think that
Yeah.
it may. Oh, I remember what I was going to say now. So
Yeah.
I think also, and not that anyone who doesn't have a learning disability is not going to work hard. And when I say this, that's not what I'm saying. But when you have a disability, you have to work 10 times harder than anybody else. So
Right.
when you have that job or that career, you already know you have to work harder because everything we do involves writing, reading, right? So you already are on that path to working hard. So I think when you accept it and you're moving forward, your work ethic is just there already because you don't have a
Right.
choice. You've already worked. I mean, think about you. You played football in college, right? So you played
Right.
football, you managed your grades, and all those things. A lot of people can't even play a sport in college without managing their grades
Right.
without a disability. So the
Right.
people who have learning disabilities, their work ethic is already so strong because you've already had to work hard your entire life to get to that point. And not, and
Right.
by, I'm not like putting down anyone who doesn't have a disability. I'm not saying they're
Of
not
course.
working
Of course.
hard, but it's a different kind of
Just
work.
what it
You've
is.
struggled your
Right.
entire life.
Right.
So
Yeah. And it builds character, right? I mean, it builds amazing character in people. Because knowing that you had to work double as hard as somebody and knowing that you may not have gotten the same grade or maybe less than that other person, but you did it and you finished it. And that turns into, oh gosh, I hate this too. Wow. Like it should be a pride thing. Right.
right.
And that's why I keep these IEPs and things next to my desk, is because I know how hard I had to work. And that to me is like a badge of honor. And I think um, our students need to understand that the harder you work and then you find that success needs to be honorable. You need to acknowledge that and say, dang, man, I really worked hard for this. I deserve this. But look what I could accomplish when I do work hard. And I think that's extremely important.
Yep. And they're going to be fine. Anyone who's
Yes.
got it, they're going to be fine.
And I think that's the most important thing is just to keep that positivity going for not just the child, but for the kids too. So again, I don't want to take up your whole Sunday. I know it's the
Fine.
Sunday, and you have to start worrying even more about your presentation
All
tomorrow.
right. My notes, I'm highlighted. I have notes and they're all different colors. I still do that all.
But you're going to be fine. Is there anything that you would like to tell anybody out there, or ask me, or anything like that you kind of want to just leave your lasting impression with?
Just continue to work hard. Know that there is always a way. If you don't understand something, there's always a way to get you to understand it. Don't be afraid to ask because your teachers love you. They wouldn't be in that field if they didn't love you and love what they want you to accomplish. So I think that I think a lot of times for me, I felt alone. I'm older than you, so it wasn't, and I wasn't like in a class where I had the small group, so I did feel alone a lot. So, um, I wish I had advocated a little bit more for myself, and I wish I had expressed my feelings about feeling the way I did, because I think I would have gotten the help I needed sooner. So, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to say you don't understand because someone is always going to be there, whether it's your teachers, your parents, friends, someone will always be there to guide you to where you need to go. You should never feel that way because there's
Right.
people around you that love you and want you to succeed. I think that's what I want people to know.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think it's find that one person where you feel comfortable with. If you
Right.
are, afraid to advocate for yourself on a broader scale. And Miss Dietrich, you were that person for me. I'm not afraid. I know I was a clown and stuff, but I felt like when we worked one on one, I was actually trying, and I didn't do that in all of my classes. So
Right. And you
Thank you.
want
I
to feel
appreciate
safe. So you're right. Like you said,
it.
find that person you feel safe
Right,
with that you can be yourself with. And it's about being
right,
yourself. It's not about putting on an act. It's not about, counting to see where you're going to have to read. That one person that you can be yourself and say, I don't understand. I'm confused. I
right,
don't understand.
right. Because you'll never understand it by hiding. I can
Nope,
tell you that right now. Uh,
never.
a- and and I always tell our kids, and it's one of the big things we teach here is that self advocacy piece. And um, because we're a transition school, and eventually we're going to build these kids up to where they need and be successful elsewhere. But without that advocacy skills, and if you're going to continue to hide in the back of the room, you're gonna fall right back down.
Yep.
So you just need to be able to fight for yourself and know what your worth is, and know that there is a goal in sight, and to reach that goal.
And you have a disability, wear it like a badge of honor, but it also makes you special in the
Right.
fact that you have this and you're going to work harder to work through it.
Yep. And again, you know, the more difficult things the more difficult things are, the better you're going to feel when you get past it and when you do it. And I mentioned in the last episode is I like proving people wrong, and that's I guess part of the LD. And um, I was not going to tell somebody was not going to tell me that I wasn't going to do something, especially
That
academically.
molded
So
you to who you are. Because look at you
right,
now. That molded
yeah,
you
exactly.
every step of the
It's a
way.
big
I
moment.
think it
Mhm.
molded you in your sports career too. Because I think you
Yeah,
just it everywhere. I think it touched every aspect of your life.
yeah. And if that's the way that you want to think, and the listeners out there, then think that way. But if you want to think another way, that is fine. But just find your motivating factor, find what drives you, and just keep going. Don't let anybody tell you can't. So,
Believe in yourself. I think my biggest thing was that I just didn't believe in myself. And like I said,
right,
I'm 53 and I still struggle with
right.
that. Still finding that I can do this, Sue. Like you know what you're talking about. You got this. Just go. Like
Like
I have
tomorrow.
to self-talk my right. I have to self-talk myself into this way. And that's because those doubts when I was a little girl
Yeah.
creep into my mind.
Yeah.
So don't let that drive you.
So this has been awesome. Obviously, we could talk for hours and days, and we will talk again probably next week, and that's just the way it is. But I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been awesome. And I would love to have you on again eventually once this gets rolling. And you're the best, and you know that.
My
I tell you that
pleasure.
every time.
I loved every second and I am so proud of you. So proud of
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. All right, guys, please remember, if you haven't listened to the first episode with Josh Clark, who is the chair of the International Dyslexia Association, who's also dyslexic, please go ahead and listen to that. It's a really good episode as well. We are going to try to get these podcasts out twice a month for now until I can get a lot more willing guests onto the show. So if you are dyslexic, or you have a child that's dyslexic, or if you're a teacher of dyslexic, please reach out. The more people I can get on here, the more our message could get out. So that's the important thing. So hit that subscribe button, because again, that helps more viewership, and it gets the ball rolling for everything. So again, Ms. Dietrich, love you. Thank you so much for being
You
on.
too.
Everybody, we will see you next week. Oh,
Bye.
sorry, next month. Bye bye.
Bye.